Well, the interview with the oil company was yet another farce, of course, and we were so disappointed when I had been found medically unfit to go to Abu Dhabi. We managed to pick ourselves up, but I knew at the Brisbane Language College my number was coming up sooner or later. It was a matter of time. The director of studies was appalling, and I knew I couldn't last much longer. I don't believe it, said Maria, and neither did I. I had bounded up the stairs from the computer room down below in 15-story road after reading an email from CFBT, Centre for British Teachers in Brunei, offering me a position to start as an English teacher on August the 26th. What? It was a feeling of complete disbelief. Elation? Euphoria? Yes. We were afraid to believe it. After so many disappointments, I had almost totally lost my confidence. But it seemed that finally our run of bad luck, which had started in 1990 on our arrival to Melbourne, had finally come to an end in 2001. Well, this was possibly the most farcical interview of all, because there was no interview, in fact, not even by telephone. It was all done by email. But why would they offer me a job without an interview? Well, a pretty obvious question to most people, but I can assure you it didn't occur to me at the time. We were so happy we just didn't see what we did not want to see. I'm getting ahead of myself, and I don't want to spoil the story because for the time being we were totally elated. At last, at last, at last, I emailed them back and accepted the offer without an interview. I then received a reply in writing saying that I needed to have a telephone chat with a quote unquote with a former teacher from Brunei who was a quote unquote a CFBT representative and who would tell me about living and working conditions in Brunei. Yes, of course. No problem. We were in. By now, I knew myself very well. If I was unhappy at a school, the job wouldn't last. And I couldn't risk going to a place and then returning after a short period. Not this time. No, because not with the family at this critical stage. Roger was coming towards the end of his high schooling at St. Paul's in Brisbane, so it was clear to me that I had to go to Brunei first alone and check it out. I'd had enough experience of overseas positions to know now never ever to make the mistake of taking your family with you overseas without first checking things out. I had bitter memories of what happened to us on arrival in Australia. Being trapped. I was not going to let this happen again. Ever. At first, I thought it best that I went in August and then Maria and the children joined me in Brunei in December. But I later realized that this was not a feasible plan, as it would mean Maria having to pack up all our belongings and renting the house on her own with her 3 children there. So I planned to come back in November and help her pack up and rent the house at Christmas. Then, in a surprise development, we were very fortunate. The Queensland Housing Department agreed to our letting the house. I don't quite know why. It was against their policy. It was probably just out of laziness. I started to pack, and I said nothing to anybody in Australia, mainly because I couldn't really believe myself that I was going. I'd become neurotic and pessimistic to the point that I felt there must surely be some last minute hitch, some problem which would prevent me from going. I decided to use my frequent flyer points to go visit my mum in Ireland. I thought this might be my last opportunity to see her. She was 85, and although in excellent health, I was unsure when we would ever be in a position financially to make it back to Ireland from Borneo. So I went home for a week and was able to catch up with all of the friendly people in Donegal, all friends of her family, including Alan McGonigal. In fact, Alan was visiting in Brisbane while I was in Ireland. I met his parents in Donegal. He was in Brisbane with a rugby team from his school. But when I got back to Australia, I was disappointed to find that Alan seemed to be less than interested in arranging a meeting. Alan and I used to play together as children. Sometimes sad how things turn out. Some would say I'm sentimental. I like to think it's more than sentimentality, which drives the desire to foster friendship. But perhaps I'm wrong. The next section deals with my arrival in Brunei. I arrived in Brunei in May and was met at the airport by two CFBT ladies. One looked youngish and the other about my age. I don't know what they must have made of me in the evening, arriving as I did in my Aussie hat off the airplane. I was taken to my house and I remember being impressed by the size of it, especially the front room. However, close inspection revealed that there was in fact very little furniture in it, and the house was roasting hot. I was sharing with a very nice Australian couple who had been living in Singapore. We arrived on the Saturday. On Sunday, we were left totally to our own devices to find food and to find our way around. This week I did the driving and we turned up at CFBT on the Monday morning for our 4-day express orientation course. Most of it was valuable information, but there was too much and we were exhausted after 2 days. I managed to get sick towards the end of it, and my friends, both of them, left to go to another town to their school, so I was left on the Saturday on my own. I'd managed to pick up some bug during the week in my stomach, and by Saturday afternoon I felt awful. By Saturday evening I had severe diarrhea. On Sunday I felt a little bit better, but by the evening I was feeling awful again. I went to bed 5 o'clock in the morning. My first day at school, I scrambled through my papers looking for phone numbers of people who I might know in order to phone the school to tell them that I was not going to make it into work on the very first day. Later, I was to realize that nobody cared whether I arrived or not. Hardly an auspicious start. One of the Aussie teachers at this school had been assigned to be my mentor on the first day. So one day late, on the Tuesday, he met me at the boat. I had to go to the school by boat. Yes, it was really quite a beautiful journey, actually, of 5 minutes across the river. He took me across and we walked to the school. We went into the staff room and he pointed me to the classroom of 2A. And that was it. I heard very little from my mentor again. So much for being a mentor. You're on your own, mate, was his message. And that really gets to me about these Aussies, as they talk themselves up so much and think they're the most friendly people in the world. Well, judge for yourself. 10 minutes later, after a cursory g'day from the Aussie head of department, who was Frankie, my boy, I managed the first of the 3 consecutive double classes I had planned for that Tuesday morning. I'd prepared the same class, of course, for all 3. At the end of the 3 classes, I came back to the staff room. I knew immediately that it hadn't been an outstanding success, but I'd survived. I was pretty sure that the teaching was going to be disappointing. Anyway, so I sat down and waited in that horrible, smelly little staff room, which had been flooded by water some years previously, and it stank to high heaven. Anyway, after a few minutes, my mentor came over to gloat, I presumed, and he said, "Well, how was that then?" And I paused and I said, "Yes, interesting." I got the distinct impression that they knew I'd been given a rough group of classes in the lower school, and they were going to enjoy my discomfort. So my reply was sufficiently non-committal to deny them the pleasure of enjoying my humiliation. After a few days, I realized the school was a total disaster. The kids were hopelessly disorganized, didn't listen to a word that the teachers said. Curriculum was a disgrace. It was actually the same curriculum I had done myself 40 years ago in Ireland as a native speaker. Please contemplate that. I will say it again because people simply don't believe me. But it is true that the curriculum I was asked to teach was actually the same curriculum I had done 40 years ago in Ireland as a native speaker. Shakespeare and all included. And this was a group of 12 to 13-year-old Malay-speaking children in Borneo. It was impossibly difficult for 90% of the students, and so they were doomed to failure. Most of them, understandably, did not bring books or pens or pencils or anything to class. Why would they? They knew the curriculum was a joke. They constantly got out of their seats, walked around without asking permission, and talked incessantly to each other all the time, especially when I was talking. Worse still, the English department was at war with the administration. There was an acting principal who had no faith in the expatriate CFBT English department, and she hated the expatriate teachers. I could see that as a new teacher, I was not going to be exempt from her contempt. For the first few weeks, I was scared, not sure where to put my feet. I became increasingly anxious and grew worried about the imminent arrival of my family, which would commit me to such a disastrous workplace. I just could not believe it. I was inconsolable. How could this be happening to me? What had I done to deserve this? I had great difficulty sleeping at night and suffered from night terrors. Strangely, things seemed to get better when I was at the school, even though the school was so terrible. The worst of it was thinking about it when I went home. In a way, though, it was good because you could leave at 12:30. My colleagues were quite good company and were helpful when I asked for assistance in general. But some of them were really quite disaffected because of their own battles with the administration. I went home every night and had a beer and a gin and tonic in order to anesthetize the day's events. After a few weeks, I spoke to the CFBT counsellor, and she was actually very good. She came to my house several times in the period of about 2 months. But after 6 weeks or so, I realized that I just could not commit myself to work in this environment for a period of 5 to 6 years. I would simply go insane. I hadn't the courage to tell Maria for a couple of weeks. And when I eventually did, she was understandably disappointed. This made me feel even worse, and that somehow I was responsible for the situation. I was in a bind.